Welcome everybody to the session on Bible and literature as part of the PAMLA 2021 conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. We have the four panelists. What I'd like to do is have the panelists speak for approximately 16 minutes or so. And then afterwards we'll have questions, comments and questions from those who are here on Zoom. The first speaker is Alma Valencia Escobar. She's a graduate student at San Diego State University, where she specializes in British literature. She is currently working on her thesis on romantic masculinity in Jane Austen's novels. Alma is invested in making a case for the clergymen, quote, bad boys, who allegedly seduce heroines as products of the system. Alma is also a full-time perioperative nurse at Scripps Memorial and Family Nurse Practitioner doctoral candidate at Bradley University. Bravo for that. Her lecture today is entitled A Promise Intact, the Patriarchal Covenant of God. Alma?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me in the panel. So I will begin with reading my paper. So the title of my paper is A Promise Intact, the Patriarchal Covenant of the Hebrew God. And I'll begin. So in the book of Exodus, the Israelites behold the presence of the living God. Exodus 32 speaks of the place where the God of their forefathers speaks with them. In a sense, in this chapter, God's anger is charged against the sin of idolatry and foreshadows their sentence of not being able to enter the promised land. The sin and betrayal of the stiff-necked people, as stated in Exodus 32:9, is so great that the Hebrew God is willing to remove his promise, the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and make a great nation, as stated in Exodus 32:10 from Moses. The promises made, or the covenant that the Hebrew God made with Abraham, which was to be effected after the exodus from Egypt, was thence pondered, nullified by such sin. The promise of the promised land, or the city of God on earth, becomes a promise which is thence prolonged and extended, one which none, not even Moses or his brother Aaron, see in the flesh. So the word, with the capital W, or the Hebrew Bible, is specific to stating that all of this occurred due to the calf which Aaron made. But then why is Aaron not punished, as stated in Exodus 32:35? Aaron does not receive a punishment, the same punishment as the Israelites, but he does have the punishment of dying in the wilderness, losing his two sons, and not entering the promised land. It is also important to note that God allowed this to demonstrate that he takes the most unlikely person, redeems that person, and uses that person for his glory, according to the Hebrew Bible. So Aaron promoted and he made possible the idolatry of the non-God, and then he would have been used as a high priest to direct the people to worship the one Hebrew God. He did this also, speaking of the Hebrew God, with the former murderer and persecutor Saul of Tarsus, and then used the Apostle Paul to preach to the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people. So the testimony of the later Apostle Paul is an example of the Hebrew God's promise of redemption and forgiveness. The action of forgiveness in this Hebrew God of the Israelites showcases him as a powerful God who shows a steadfast love to thousands, but does punish sin. This is stated by Terschblanche. The promise of the Hebrew God was not nullified, but instead rectified and executed according to the same manner of his promise to the patriarch Abraham. So therefore, the covenant remains. This paper will explore the unspoken punishment of Aaron, the children of Israel, and the consequences of the Hebrew God's promise. So in looking at the consequential God-sent plague in Exodus 32:35, which afflicted the Israelites for their idolatry, in all this, the Hebrew God remains faithful and acts in his loving kindness as a father. The den of sin to which the Israelites are led in the absence of Moses resembles the sin-filled activities of Sodom and Gomorrah, where their sins were exceedingly grave, as stated in Genesis 18:20. So while there is no mention of idolatry and sexual activities while the golden calf was made, there is a close connection to the Hebrew God's definition of idolatry. Idolatry in modern interpretation may only have a religious association. So the Hebrew God's definition of sin, the sin of idolatry, is that which is similar to prostitution. In this way, the sexual immorality in Sodom and Gomorrah are classified by the Hebrew God's spiritual fornication. Modern interpretations of Sue masculinity as a portal for Moses compare and contrast his masculinity as erroneous, stated by Ramos Gay. It is not Moses' construction of gender that intimidates his masculinity when the golden calf is made. It is actually the physical display of profanation of the Hebrew God, whom they have known as a jealous God. So this is stated from Exodus 34:14, where it reads, "For thou shalt worship no other God with the minuscule g, for the God whose name is jealous, capital J, is a jealous God." The word states that the church, that the believers they're the bride of Christ in Corinthians 2:11-2. So if the church members deviate and prostitute to other distractions in this spiritual infidelity to God, they are committing this sin. So friendship with the world then becomes embracing worldly activities and becomes idolatry by the definition of this Hebrew God. So a harsh classification is also seen in James 4:4, where he calls these activities forms of adulterous nature. There is no required physical activity or infidelity. So therefore, the calf or bull image as the deity to be worshipped instead of Jehovah was an act of infidelity towards the Hebrew God of Israel. And this is stated by Hundley in one of his papers. So here, embracing the den of sin is sufficient enough for the offense to be made. In the absence of guidance represented by Moses, the Israelites lose their focus on God. In Exodus 32, the people of Israel have been walking in the desert for a long time. They are aware of the promise God made to his people, but choose to lead themselves instead of genuinely trusting the God of Israel. We learn that the Exodus took the Israelites 40 years when the trip from Oreb to the way of Mount Seir was only 11 days. This is stated in Deuteronomy 1:2. So the Hebrew God's compassionate nature is demonstrated in not taking pleasure in the 40-year-long extended self-led journey of lack of obedience and faith, but instead ending the wandering. God speaks to Moses and says, "You have circled the mountain long enough," in Deuteronomy 2:2. The mountain is significant since it represents physical challenges faced due to the separation from the Hebrew God. The trip from Egypt to Canaan would have redeemed all the former shame and loss with a minimal time of 11 days. However, the Israelites rebelled, became obstinate in their hearts, and did not accept the salvation of the Hebrew God. So Ray Comfort states that in the absence of Moses, the Israelites enter a stage of trembling rather than the expected fear of the Lord. According to the Hebrew Bible, the fear of the Lord was exemplified in obedience to the Hebrew God. When the Israelites lost sight of Moses, they created their own image of God in the golden calf. There is something in human psychology that requires creating a physical resemblance of a God to understand one's worldview. It is almost as if in this mirror reflection, the human feels that they could relate to the highest level of actualization by practicing creating. In this pseudo-God complex, the human inverts the creator role with the Hebrew God, creator, and creates. The material is of great significance since gold and metals are classified in the first letter of Peter 18:19 as corruptible things, which are not worthy of redemption of sins. So the Apostle Paul states that that genuine fear of the Hebrew God is only through the blood of Christ and not through gold or silver. Yet his promise remains intact as the Hebrew God redeems his people with his blood. Joyce Meyer speaks of the wilderness mentality in the Israelites even after the physical chains of Egypt were removed from their limbs. So psychoanalysis on the slave or subordinate status may support this claim that the Israelites viewed themselves as slaves for many generations. Changing their self-perception was impossible. So Meyer argues that while the Israelites were aware of their lack of happiness in the wilderness, they knew it was better to remain there than to return back to slavery. In a sense, Meyer's state of wilderness mentality appears contradictory to the purpose of God's promise to his people. But even if the perpetual slave status would allow no desired change, it is pretty unlikely that the Israelites longed to remain beaten, overworked, and demeaned. However, the wilderness can serve as a temporary space where the Israelites could be protected from themselves. The wilderness serves as a delay in time, identity, and personal desires that would have deviated the Israelites further from their God. The significance of the mountain also alludes to the place on earth where the Hebrew God resides. So Exodus 24 begins with Moses coming down from the mountain where the Lord had told him to meet him alone. The children of Israel are read what is given to Moses, and they all answer in one voice by saying, "All the words which the Lord has said, we will do," in Exodus 24:3. This disposition to obey the Lord is vital. The affirmation of the covenant made with God, this pact with God in chapter 24, involves sacrifices. Then on the mountain, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel saw the Lord of Israel in Exodus 24:10. And he states, like, "Come to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you the tablets of stone," in Exodus 24:12. We know that these stones will become the 10 Commandments, signifying the unchanging nature of the stone. So the law will not falter and will not change. The stone also represents the previous nature of the Israelites' hearts and their rejection to the Hebrew God. So here, the Hebrew God remains, and it's represented and signified by the stone, and he is still in the mountain. God purposely takes the Israelites through the long way in Exodus 32. So this chapter describes what occurred with the Israelites while Moses was in the mountain speaking to God. The word states that Moses delayed, Exodus 32:1a, and the people grew impatient. They said to Moses, "Come, make us gods that will show us, that shall go before us. For this Moses, the man that brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And this is from Exodus 32:1. So in waiting, they turned to another God. In waiting, they decided to make their own God. Here we see that human condition to have that desire to believe in a higher power. So even agnostics here, or like from the self-claimed atheist perspective, will turn to prayer in difficult situations. And in this condition, there is this innate purpose of worshiping a God in desperation. But God here did not delay. He delayed with a purpose. And these moments of waiting, the Hebrew God demands a practice of radical faith and trust. So what could have motivated Aaron to fail in such a way? So one can note that this occurs shortly after the chapter where he is consecrated as a priest. Now, why would Aaron give in to this request by the people? The word states that he said to them, "Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people broke off the golden earrings in their ears and brought them to Aaron, and he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and molded a calf. This is from Exodus 32:2-4. So he crafted the idol himself. Possibly peer pressure, possibly fear of being attacked if he objected. Perhaps Aaron lacked faith himself for not seeing Moses return promptly. So I want to bring your attention to the statement the Israelites made after seeing the gold calf that Aaron made for them. They said, he said to them, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Exodus 32:4. The Israelites called the golden calf God. They were then they completed their statement by wrongly attributing it the benefit of like providing the exodus from Egypt. This is very important because the devil the interpretation here is to deviate another practice of idolatry and negation of the truth according to like the Hebrew Bible. So they knew that the golden calf was not the one that saved them or that provided the way from the exodus from the Egyptians, but they assigned it as the new God. And in the latter part of chapter 32 of Exodus, we see that the Hebrew God is angered due to the idolatry of his people. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen these people, and indeed they are stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make you a great nation. This is from Exodus 32, verses 9 through 10. But the Hebrew God was moved by his love and compassion for his people, even after this great act of sin. And I want to bring your attention again to the anger. Moses then becomes angry and speaks out of line. He says, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now you will forgive their sin. But if not, I pray, blot me out of your book, which you have written. This is from Exodus 32, 31, 32. So here Moses is asking God, the Hebrew God, to remove his name from the Hebrew God's book of the promise he had made. At this moment, the Hebrew God responds to Moses, saying that he will decide who is removed from the promise and who is not. Again, the Hebrew God demonstrates his love and compassion for Moses, even after breaking the 2 stones with the commandments out of anger after seeing the people sin. Then one can question, why does Aaron not receive punishment? So the word states, when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, for Aaron had not restrained them, to their shame among their enemies, then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp and said, whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. And the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him, and he said to them, thus says the Lord of Israel, let every man put his sword on his side and go out from the entrance to entrance throughout the camp, and let every man kill his brother, every man in his companion, and every man his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men fell that day. Exodus 32, 25 to 28. So 3,000 men passed that day because of their sin. We read that the Lord plagued the people for their great sin of idolatry. The annihilation of Israel in the desert may be read as an example of a vindictive Hebrew God towards disobedient subjects, as stated by Kugler. Moses comes down with wrath, and those who refused to serve the Hebrew God died by sword, as also stated by Comfort. This slaying of Israelites was perceived as a way to instill the fear of the Hebrew God. However, the God of Israel would have annihilated all of Israel and not allowed any option for redemption. The God of Israel could have charged their self-led den of sin, but did not. The word is specific with stating that this occurred due to the calf that Aaron had made. But then, why was Aaron not punished? Aaron will be punished by dying in the wilderness and losing his sons and not entering the promised land. It is also important to note that the Hebrew God allowed this to demonstrate that he takes the most unlikely person to redeem for his glory. So Aaron he promoted and made it possible for the idolatry of a non-God, and then he would be used as a high priest to direct the people to worship the Hebrew God. The promise of the Hebrew God remains intact in the New Testament, with the redemption of the former, in the same way that he did with the former murderer and persecutor Saul of Tarsus, as I previously stated. So then does redemption come with the cost by definition of the Hebrew God? The Israelites who were liberated from the bondage of Egypt were not the same Israelites who entered the promised land. Moses himself did not enter the promised land. Moses not being allowed to live out the promise of God, the God of Israel, had made him may be interpreted as reading Moses as a medieval vision of soteriological justice. So in this light, Moses would be the man who prioritizes his people over even his own soul. So in that sense, his angry reaction to the failure of the golden calf demonstrates this. However, the book of Joshua, which follows Exodus, begins with the same intact promise from the Hebrew God. He speaks to Joshua and says, Moses, my servant, is dead now. Therefore, arise into the land which I am giving them to the sons of Israel. This is from Joshua 1:2. The reward of the promised land becomes a land that needs to be won over. As opposed to Moses, Joshua is a warrior.
Alma, you have about 2 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. I have like one more paragraph. So as opposed to Moses and Joshua is a warrior, and the Hebrew God used him to hold and win over the promised land. So the intact promise from the Hebrew God can be magnified in his ability to allow the reward to be a possibility for his people, even in after their spiritual idolatry. So it is not that an abnormal importance is devoted to the metal or its origin, but the option of redemption. It is magnified, and the consequences of such disobedience and idolatry prevent the children of Israel from continuing in the wilderness state to the promised land. The Hebrew God allowed the delay in the trip to the promised land to protect the Israelites from danger. The Hebrew God's intact promise of redemption and life is exemplified in noting that through the law, death came, but through the gospel, the option of life and redemption became prevalent. So a second chance is what is described in the new Gospels, which we will hear from like our other presenters, where the necessity of the Gospels speaks of the sob of God for the prodigal Israelites. The plea and the sob for the lost is the aim of the promise intact made by the Hebrew God to his people. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we have questions. I have comments and questions. We'll wait till everyone has presented, and then we can have questions, comments, and questions. The second speaker is Janessa Kenway, PhD candidate in literature at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, studying feminine aesthetics and the interconnections between art and literature. Her work tracking beauty and the sublime in Elizabeth Stoddard's Two Men won the 2020 Brooks Higgins Award, and she was awarded a Dorothy May Feisel Scholarship for Excellence in Disciplinary Scholarship, Projects, and Classroom Instruction Methods. In 2021, the 2021 exhibit she curated for the Marjorie Barrack Art Museum entitled The Beauteous Tree, Margaret Fuller's Femality, paired feminist quotes from Fuller, Virginia Woolf, and others with works of visual art. She writes on art and culture for KNPR Desert's Companion and teaches courses in composition and world literature at UNLV. Her lecture today is entitled Sacred Female Tongue, the Sacred Female Tongue in Mary of Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you so much for introducing me. Yeah, that is a made-up word by Margaret Fuller, femality. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you. Okay, let's make this happen. Okay. It's how is this not sharing? Advanced sharing options. Oh, only host all persistence. The sharing options are in place. It's just okay. There it goes. I think it's desktop. There we go. Oh, we should have probably tried this before the session started, since it's kind of giving me some little bit of weird issues that I was not expecting. But hopefully I can just make this work. So is it gonna work? I think it's working. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, great. Fantastic. So I'm just gonna keep it like this. And so Sacred Mother Tongue in Mary of Egypt. In the stories recounting the lives of Christian saints, those of female saints seem hopelessly shrouded in male discourse. Today, I'm going to talk about the story of a female saint that takes off all her clothes and some of that male discourse. Male bishops write the stories of holy women, and holy women frequently operate in comparison to holy men and male figures from the Bible. Locating instances of unmediated female discourse within these stories seems nearly impossible. Luce Irigaray cites a similar struggle in Speculum of the Other Woman, theorizing the impossibility of articulating woman within the bounds of phallogocentric discourse, suggesting the idea of woman cannot be expressed through male-dominated language. Outside of this process, she says, is the nothing that is woman. Positioning woman outside the dominant linguistics of a binary gendered system raises the possibility of female language developing in that outside space, in the arid plains of nothingness. This is the location in which the harlot saint Mary of Egypt resides. Linguistic moments throughout her story betray a struggle to communicate female identity from sexuality to gender to spirituality. Unique among the saints, Mary alone experiences conversion through visual female inspiration, bypassing words altogether. The biblical identities of spiritual leaders seated throughout her story blur her gender, pointing out the inherent female gender issues of aesthetic discourse. Yet, ultimately, it is through her body and presence that Mary is able to express her identity as a holy woman. Mary will exchange sexual ecstasy for an embodied spiritual ecstasy. While there are powerful parallels between Saint Mary and John the Baptist, Saul, and Jesus, she brings to these narratives a presence that is distinctly feminine. Although the story is recounted by a male hagiographer, there are critical visual and linguistic moments within the story that even he cannot penetrate. It is in these moments that we catch glimpses of a hidden sacred female tongue. Mary's heightened sexuality is the first indication that her story is engaged with female experience and language. Discussing female sexuality, Irigaray asserts it is so obscure, so faded, that it would undoubtedly have a different alphabet, a different language. Woman's desire would not be expected to speak the same language as man's. Irigaray contends that understanding of female desire is so murky as to suggest the terms of its expression must be missing in a lost language. The struggle for linguistic clarity is present in Mary's attempts to explain her past feelings of desire to the priest Zosima, so that he may, quote, understand the insatiable fire within her. O Zosimus, she says, how can I explain to you, or in which tongue may I tell of or hear with what ears the sinful deeds that occurred? With only the terms of shame, guilt, and sin available for vocalizing her sexuality, Mary begs, do not force me to say any more about my shame, to which Zosima responds with a passionate exhortation to continue her life-giving narrative, naturally finding the confession of female sexual shame to be a positive thing. More than simply acts of sin, it is possible to view Mary's acts as acts of frustrated communication. Let me jump ahead with my slides. There we go. I get so into reading that I forget to change my slides. Frustrated acts of communication. She confesses she did it with as many as I could get to come to me. What I did out of insatiable desire. She is unable to quench her desire. Over and over again, she pursues sexual satisfaction, never achieving fulfillment. The story infers that this is a matter of overflowing stores of lust. But the terms used to express Mary's desire are riddled with the inexpressibility of female desire that corresponds with Irigaray's suggestion that she will not say what she herself wants, or does not know what she wants, as the terms, the language for expressing it, are missing. As Mary joins a group of sailors heading to Jerusalem, her description of her lust continues to employ words that convey the inability to verbalize female sexuality, calling it perverted and unspeakable. And what acts happened on that boat, no tongue can say. Ultimately, rather than extinguished, Mary's longing for physical ecstasy will be transposed into an embodied spiritual ecstasy. Rather than words, the catalyst for St. Mary's conversion is a visual encounter with a picture of the Holy Mother of God, the Virgin Mary. On arriving in Jerusalem, repelled by an inexplicable force, Mary is unable to enter a cathedral to view the Holy Cross. Initially, she attributes this failure to her weakness as a woman, and notably, it will be the strength of a woman that permits her to enter, during which we encounter the first occurrence of female language in the text. While gazing on the Theotokos, a nonverbal salutary understanding touched her mind and the eyes of her heart, showing her that it was the sinfulness of her actions that prevented her from entering the church. Mary realizes the sense communication is emanating from the image of the Holy Virgin. She then begs the Virgin Mother to grant her forgiveness, exchanging her burning lust for burning faith. Her conversion experience impacts her on a physical level that is nearly orgasmic, as on entering the cathedral, she threw herself on the floor and kissed the sacred dust. This sacred communique between Mary and Mother transpires on a visual, physical, and spiritual levels without words. Locating the transmission within the sensual gaps or the betweens that occur in being or beings of which Irigaray speaks that reopen the question of the void, a space that exists beyond the male narrator's control, pockets of inaccessible female expression in which something of her might be found. The first communication sets up a closed loop of female spiritual dialogue. Leaving the church, Mary next begs the Holy Mother to lead her to salvation. Teach me what is true. The choice to turn to a saintly female mediator and teacher sets up a circle of sacred female communication between the repentant Mary and her divine mentor that will persist during her travels in the desert. Within her mind, Mary hears the lady say, "If you cross over the Jordan, you will find rest." Mary becomes a Christian, accepting the Son of God, but prays to and follows the guidance of the Queen of the whole world. The medieval translation of Mary's story in Jane Chance's series amplifies the division between male figureheads of Christianity and Mary still further, with the newly converted Mary declaring her commitment to the glorious lady, choosing her as a protector against her own child, curiously desiring shielding from the Son of God, who is supposed to be her savior. Mary herself is visually transformed by her conversion experience as she hurries away, heading out of the town, a random stranger presses 3 pennies into her hand, saying, "Take these, mother." The effect of her conversion, lending her the maternal appearance of her holy mentor. As her clothing wears out in the desert, Mary gradually sheds her secular life and grows darker in appearance as the sun blackens her skin. Discussing the meaning of female nakedness in early asceticism in her book, Carnal Knowing, Margaret Miles explains, and I quote, "Religious representations of nakedness were generally statements of committed resistance to secular or fallen society. Thus, many were ambiguously positive. To be stripped of clothing was to be stripped of secular socialization, to be divested of acculturation, to repudiate investment in the social world. Removal of clothing allows ascetics to visually demonstrate rejection of the sinful habits of society, culture, and return to a state of purity and innocence." Much to our disappointment, Miles did not find any evidence of ascetic nudist colonies. So nakedness is relegated to a symbolical gesture in stories like that of Mary of Egypt. Despite nakedness representing stripping off society, Mary's nakedness does not strip her of male institutional authority, as her nudity is the embodiment of Christian ascetic doctrine. Nakedness represents the ascetic practice of giving up everything to follow Christ, or as St. Jerome likes to put it, nudus nudum Jesum sequi, naked to follow a naked Christ. In fact, Jerome equated nakedness with virginity, stating that for those enveloped in the skin of matrimony, it was too late to seek the nakedness of virginity. Women who practice asceticism by maintaining their virginity, explains Miles, renounced sexual and reproductive activity, essentially renouncing their identity as women to become the equal of a man. So Mary's naked wanderings can be seen as a means of re-virginizing her. However, I argue that this does not mean she renounces her female identity. While Mary's primary identity is female, compelling arguments are made by Virginia Burris regarding Mary's blurred gender identity. As Burris and others note, her self-baptism in the Jordan River invokes John the Baptist. The 3 loaves she receives on her way out of town gesture towards Saul, her white wool hair with the Son of Man in Revelations, and of course, we can't forget walking on water like Jesus. This information can be construed as blurring or masculinizing her identity. While there are some notable female biblical figures that could have been invoked on Mary's behalf, analogies with powerful male figures carry more weight and aids in distancing her from that pesky female body holding her back from holiness. In the text recording the lives of saintly women, there is overwhelming discomfort and uncertainty regarding the possibility of directly joining the term of woman with holy. Even in the life of Macrina, an untainted virgin without the issue of harlotry to contend with, gender is still an issue. Gregory begins her story with the disclaimer, if indeed she was a woman, for I am not sure it is right to refer to someone by their sex when she has transcended her sex. Female holiness seems to require becoming male or transcending gender altogether because aesthetic discourse is unable to articulate spiritual femininity independent of the masculine. So instead, as Irigaray explains, it converts her, and I quote, to discourse that denies the specificity of her pleasure by homosexualizing her. It dewomanizes her. This forces Mary to display male power fantasies to recreate their struggle for spiritual power in the form of reenacting John's baptism, Saul's loaves of bread, and the water walking and trials of Jesus in the desert. This would make, according to Irigaray, the harlotry of Mary a prostitution of the unconsciousness itself, enacting masculine spiritual gratification upon her mind and body. While Mary's story resounds with the experiences of male biblical leaders rather than her own, she imbues these moments with a distinctly feminine energy. We gotta switch sides. Purchasing the 3 loaves of bread transforms her into a mother. John baptized others in the Jordan, but it's unknown if he baptized himself. Likewise, passing on a full body dunking, Mary demurely washes her hands and faces in the holy river without labeling the action baptism. Traversing water is reminiscent of Christ, but Mary's steps across the Jordan occur under overtly feminine circumstances as the darkness was lit by the full splendor of the moon, since it was that time of the month. The passage simultaneously invoking the feminine symbols of cycles, the moon, and the female menstrual cycle. As she approaches him from the water, the inestimable Zosimus is rendered speechless in a great stupor at so glorious a miracle. The patriarchal discourse, for once, at a loss for words in the face of this potent visual expression of female spirituality. While Mary is surrounded and suppressed by the male religious framework in which she exists, it is unable to extinguish her female identity, which is due to the presence of her physical body radiates within the desert space she inhabits. Burris describes her as vast and uncompromisingly elemental in her passions as the desert itself. Like an earth goddess, Mary floods the earth with weeping, lies unmoving upon the ground without breath, and with indifference walks upon the element of water, exerting control without thinking over her environment. Her body, black as if scorched by the fierce heat of the sun, represents the sun-darkened beauty from Song of Songs and is the literal embodiment of Freud's dark continent of female sexuality. As she drifts upon the uncharted nowhere of the wasteland, a lithe black stylus, Mary wanders the searing parchment of the desert, inscribing her story upon the sand with her body, burned by the heat of summer, shivering in the winter. The ecstasy she sought through sex has been transformed into an embodied spiritual ecstasy. The notion of physically impressing her tale upon the land aligns with the epitaph unaccountably written in the earth, discovered by Zosima next to her corpse at the end of her tale. Right. For Mary, the surface of the desert is both page to write upon and source of knowledge. Never in any way did I learn letters, she exclaims. The word of God, living and active itself, teaches man knowledge. Simply by walking through the desert, she absorbs scriptural knowledge, presumably aided in this endeavor by her mentor, the Mother of God, who she explains has been with me, and she directs me in all things. While she is clearly conversant in the patriarchal language of the scriptures, spewing quotes left and right, the feminizing effect of conversing for the past 17 years with the Holy Mother becomes evident during a moment of prayer with Zosima. Burris remarks that, let's change it. Burris remarks that the account of Zosima's journey frames Mary's reported speech. It cannot possibly contain it. Perhaps the best example of Mary's speech escaping Zosima is her prayer made at the request of Zosima at the start of their meeting. She tells him that it is only right that he be the one to pray since he has the office of priest, but accedes to his demand to pray for him. Turning to the east and raising her eyes to heaven and stretching up her hands, she began to pray, moving her lips in silence so that almost nothing intelligible could be heard. So Zosima could not understand anything of her prayer. In both versions of the story, hopefully I can get through all of this. In both versions of the story, the fact that Zosima is unable to grasp a single word of the prayer is reinforced, which means this is an important detail. It is possibly the inability to hear, or that because she is speaking really softly, but I would like to offer a different explanation. The writer readily supplies female dialogue elsewhere in the story, but this prayer is left mysteriously unarticulated, opening up a space for female spiritual language. The Ward version tells us nothing was intelligible. Zosima couldn't understand anything. The words intelligible and understanding hinting at the possibility that this is not just a hearing issue. The repeated emphasis on the inability to understand opens up the option that not only is Mary whispering, she may be speaking a different language entirely. Years spent in the desert communing with her Holy Mother, directing the eyes of her heart to the Virgin Mary, her guarantor, praying to her without ceasing to help me in this solitude, raises the possibility of further cultivation of the female spiritual communication begun in Jerusalem, to the point that 17 years later, Mary's exchanges with her divine female mentor are no longer intelligible or communicable in phallogocentric discourse. Lending further weight, or rather lack thereof, to this idea is the detail that Mary's praying coincides with her levitation, forming a direct link between the female body and sacred interfemale communication. The terrified Zosima falls to the ground, covered with sweat at the sight of her rising a cubit from the ground. Caught up in the rapture of her steadfast prayer, a powerful demonstration of embodied female spirituality, it is possible the writer simply preferred the mysterious feminine sexiness of a whispered prayer. But a silent communication in this instance does recall the earlier silent communication with the Virgin Mary's portrait. Either way, a prayer-specific gap is just the sort of gap Irigaray refers to, a gap in which we can perceive the outline of a sacred female tongue is existing outside the bounds of male discourse and understanding. Locating female discourse within the lives of female saints turns out to be more about the words that are not spoken and the ideas present within the visuals of the stories waiting to be unpacked. The story of Mary of Egypt may be written by a man, but in between the lines, Mary adds her own passages, pressing her footsteps and huddled body into the harsh desert sand. Embedded within her sexual confession is the struggle to articulate female sexuality that points to Irigaray's lost female language. Inspired by a Theotokos in Jerusalem, Mary begins the process of recovery of that language. While her story is wrapped up in aesthetic male discourse and biblical figures that are uncertain how to handle female spirituality, her female identity still manages to rise to the surface as she literally lifts up off the ground in a persevering female prayer that no one else can understand. The presence of a sacred female tongue forms in the improbable gap between the earth and her floating body. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen. resume share. Did I ever? Okay, stop share. Thank you.
Lenny, you're muted.
Thank you. That's what I was saying when I was silent. Ju-Young Cho is our third speaker. She has graduated from Yuha, am I pronouncing it?
Ihwa.
Ihwa Women's University, South Korea. Her MA thesis is on Tom Stoppard's unique utopianism projected onto the landscape garden in Arcadia, examining his critical stance on the classical utopia and his dramaturgy foregrounding the modern utopia in the geography of utopianism. Her present research interests include modern drama, performance studies, and environmental humanities. Her lecture today is entitled Milton's Deviation from Greek Tragedy and Samson's Heroism in Samson Agonistes.
Thank you so much for introducing me. I will read my paper. In that sort of dramatic poem, which is called Tragedy, John Milton clearly states that he never intended to stage Samson Agonistes. Elizabeth Sauer extends Milton's reference and elaborates that the reason he wrote Samson Agonistes as a closet drama is because he wanted it to be read rather than staged. This is because the closet drama contains conflicting viewpoints that prevent closure, giving agency to the readers. However, it is also important to consider that Milton wrote Samson Agonistes by adopting the form of Greek tragedy. According to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Samson Agonistes was the finest imitation of the ancient Greek drama that ever had been or ever would be written. His indebtedness to Greek tragedies appears in Samson Agonistes as well. Milton says that tragedy hath been ever held the gravest, moralist, and most profitable of all other poems, and praises the three tragic dramatists, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. This at the same time brings about his lamentation about dramatists in the Restoration period, intermixing comic stuff with tragic sadness and gravity, polluting the pure effect tragedy can evoke. For these reasons, he wrote Samson Agonistes to vindicate tragedy from this small esteem, or rather infamy. Meanwhile, there were discussions on how Milton modified Greek tragic structure to accommodate biblical figuralism among young Miltonists, since Samson is often compared to Christ. William Madsen says that although Christ and Samson do relate, their types are not identical, and points out that there is a moral difference between Samson and Christ. Therefore, the purpose of this paper is to analyze Samson's heroism in relation to Greek tragedy and closet drama, since Milton particularly chose them in depicting Samson as a Christian hero. Specifically, I argue that Milton focused on narrating rather than staging by intentionally minimizing theatrical elements in Greek tragedy in order for readers to question Samson's heroism and encourage their active interpretation of it. This is significant since it shares Milton's concern on spectacles. Although theatricality is effective, it could limit readers' active interpretation and imagination. In linking Samson Agonistes with Greek tragedy, I will mainly refer to Aristotle's Poetics in order to analyze what elements in Greek tragedy give theatricality to the text. This will also show what elements in Greek tragedy Milton omitted to concentrate on telling rather than showing in Samson Agonistes. Now, according to Aristotle, a climactic plot consists of complication, rising action, crisis, climax, reversal, recognition, and resolution. Thus, it is effective in maximizing the theatrical effect, creating a spectacle since the audience has accumulated emotional attachment with the protagonist throughout the play. However, it also bears danger in that it captures the audience's emotions. It could restrain the audiences to think critically since they are captivated by what they see and sympathize with the character's pain in front of them. This is what Milton has been aware of. Therefore, instead of following the typical plot of Greek tragedy, Samson Agonistes follows the episodic plot. It neither has a single dramatic action that forwards the plot nor a problem that connects to the end, and rather consists of distinct dialogues between characters. Chorus, Manoah, Dalila, Harafa, and the officer, for instance, respectively challenge Samson on distinct topics and issues. First, the main topic between Chorus and Samson is theodicy. In relation to this, from the debate with Manoah and Dalila, Samson shows his strong will to not be subjected to anyone other than God. However, they both, the Manoah and Dalila both problematize Samson's firm belief in being God's chosen one just man. Particularly, there comes up another question of designating someone as a hero when readers hear Samson's dialogue with Dalila. After Dalila being rejected to nurse Samson, readers realize that she could also be considered as a hero to Philistines. Dalila herself exactly recognizes that she will be praised and remembered by Philistines as their nation's hero, since she succeeded in finding Samson's secret for her nation's good. This shows that becoming a hero is intertwined with politics rather than objectivity, thus suspect Samson's heroism as a product created by Israelites for a political purpose. His will to be God's one just man appears more in his agon with the officer. Meanwhile, in his agon with Harafa, however, Samson's physical strength, especially his masculinity, is both emphasized and challenged. While he self-legitimizes himself as God's chosen man despite his weaknesses, readers successively are exposed to his weaknesses, blindness, and effeminacy through their debates and watch how he tries to overcome his weaknesses. Considering these 5 agons as different episodes with different purposes, Milton puts more emphasis on how their debate is narrated in terms of understanding what kind of the protagonist Samson is. Readers are more exposed to their agons rather than tracing for evidence to reveal the protagonist's secrets, such as the Oedipus the King. This reinforces Samson's ambiguity, since readers have to judge each agon on their own interpretation. For example, they cannot easily decide whether Samson is a hero or not due to the fierce conflict between Samson's weakness and his legitimization through consecutive agons. By keeping a distance from Samson, 5 different episodes maximize the effect of telling, making it hard for readers to stick to one side. Moreover, according to Aristotle, the protagonist or the tragic hero should be renowned and prosperous, so one's change in fortune could undergo good to bad. Also, he emphasizes that it's crucial for the tragic hero's powerful wish to inevitably encounter limits that are usually caused by human frailty, the gods, or nature. However, Milton does follow these conventions by presenting Samson as a tragic hero. Although he receives the physical strength from God to save Israel's from Philistines and at last falls at the end due to his hubris, what is unique about Samson Agonistes is that when readers first encounter Samson, he is already in the middle of suffering. Furthermore, Milton illuminates more on Samson's weaknesses than his tragic features by narrating his weaknesses through agons with other characters, which makes it difficult for the readers to regard him as a true hero. Since the debate consists of numerous words, this results in having less theatrical features and facilitates readers to rely more on the words characters convey. The necessity of the reader's active interpretation continues until the end. Milton again refuses to follow elements of Greek Greek tragedy because it is the messenger who appears at last and delivers the most shocking news. That is, in Exodus, after Samson's last agon with the officer, readers do not hear from Samson anymore. Instead, they are left with even more unclear narration told by the messenger. If it was difficult to decide whether Milton is a hero, whether Samson is a hero or not from the previous agons, it becomes more challenging to judge because the direct way to hear his own opinion has been eliminated. Although messenger delivers direct quotations of Samson, what readers are hearing is, in other words, what readers are hearing is messenger's interpretation, not Samson's. We here, messenger Manoah Chorus's interpretation on Samson along with the messengers. Here, Milton is questioning whether what they hear from messenger is truly reliable or not. The reason for Samson's absence lies in pathos that the protagonist could raise to the audience. Aristotle states that the protagonist's recognition and suffering, in other words, pathos, are crucial in order for the audience to arrive at catharsis, which it refers to pity and fear. In Oedipus the King, the work that Milton considered as a quintessential type of tragedy, Oedipus appears after the messenger delivers Oedipus's identity, then provides catharsis to the audience. Aristotle says that the purpose of a true tragedy is to evoke catharsis among the audience through spectacles and guide them through the emotional pitch of the play. However, it seems like Milton has likely known the fact of the protagonist appearing at the end, possibly raising spectacles. If Samson shows the audience with his anagnosis, which is the recognition. Therefore, it is possible to imagine that Milton himself minimized factors that could raise theatricality by having messenger deliver and narrate Samson's death. Choosing not to have the protagonist at the end is a brave but effective choice of Milton, since it decreases the possibility of the readers sympathizing with Samson, but amplifies his complexity as a hero. Most of the time, the chorus in the tragedy provides commentary on actions or events that took place before the play has started and reinforces the theatricality of the plot. According to Graham Lay, a chorus has strict rhymes to increase the rhythmical sound, such as patterning of short and long syllables, along with music, with instruments and dancing, which forms a deeper connection between the characters and the audience. However, since Samson Agonist is the text made primarily for the readers, Milton is intentionally minimizing the function of the chorus. In addition to chorus appearing at the first agon with Samson, Milton deliberately deletes decimals, which is choruses singing and dancing, and this usually comes after dialogues between characters. Instead, in between agons, Milton strategically presents chorus as a challenger of Samson. That is, rather than enhancing theatricality through strophe and antistrophe within the chorus, chorus constantly interacts with Samson throughout the course of drama. In addition, another thing that is intriguing about chorus is that there is one time that they are on the side of Samson, which contradicts with the first agon they had with Samson as his antagonist. For instance, after Delilah leaves the stage, Chorus criticizes her by calling her a manifest serpent. However, after Harfa leaves, Chorus tells Samson that Harfa will head directly to the lords and with malicious counsel stir them up to afflict Samson. From these, readers find that Chorus is unreliable because they do not provide an objective view, which leads to complicating readers' decisions on Samson and on his heroism. In short, these reinforce the vagueness of Samson, therefore providing readers with questions probably Milton wanted to address. Is Samson really a tragic hero? Who defines someone as a hero? How can we assure his divine guidance? Can we trust messenger and even the chorus? As Humphrey Moseley pointed out, some scenes and passages in the text could be deleted if performed However, the readers have both all that was acted and all that was not, even the perfect full originals. This is what Milton exactly intended and succeeded in Samson Agonis. By writing it as his last masterpiece, he wanted the readers to construct classical amphitheater from the house in Judges. In other words, create inner theater in the readers' minds and extend their thoughts on the things that were not clearly mentioned in the text, other than captivated by the images or the spectacles. Then what did he want the readers to see as fallen readers? As Johann Wolfgang Goethe said that Milton's own blindness enabled him to describe with so much truth the situation of Samson. He might have hoped for the readers to solely think about not only Samson's heroism, but also seek the bigger things in life, inviting the reader to assemble the scattered body of truth. This might have been his last will to the readers as a poet who is disappointed towards politics in the Restoration period, to be not just an active and critical reader, but an active and critical individual in one's life and see what they could not see. This is what Milton's unequaled adaptation and transformation of Greek tragedy and Samson in Judges indeed tell us. Thank you for listening.
Mute it again. Thank you very much. That was good. Very interesting. Okay, we're using real hands to applaud as opposed to virtual hands here in our virtual room. Okay, our fourth speaker is Michael Paulus. He's the Dean of the Library, Assistant Provost of Educational Technology, and Director and Associate Professor of Information Studies at Seattle Pacific University. Dr. Paulus's administrative, teaching, and scholarly interests focus on the future of information and communication technology, especially their impact on higher education, libraries, work, and ethics. He is the editor of AI, Faith, and the Future, a collection of essays forthcoming in 2022 from Pickwick Publications. His lecture today is entitled Fear and Loathing in the Technological City. And you can guess what city that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. Let me hopefully have some more success sharing my screen here. It looks like that's working. Yeah, everybody see my slides there? So thank you, Lenny, for organizing this time traveling and multidisciplinary panel. And there's more of that to come. So about 50 years ago, two very different but related books appeared in the United States. Jacques Ellul's The Meaning of the City and Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, A Savage Journey to the Heart of the American Dream. Both books were commentaries on the modern technological society viewed through the image of the city. And both authors shared the book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse of John, as a source of inspiration. As our society continues to grow in complexity through transformative technologies such as artificial intelligence, the image of the city remains an important resource for understanding our technological society. So in this presentation, I bring together three interpreters of the city, Ellul, Thompson, and John of the Apocalypse, to reflect on Las Vegas as an image of our technological society. My question is, can contrasting Ellul's and Thompson's rejections of the city with the affirmation of the city that is found in the Apocalypse of John help us imagine new eschatologies for our technological society? In the Unofficial Guide to Las Vegas 2019 edition, the introduction notes that on a typical flight to Vegas, travelers may be divided into two groups. Those who believe they're on the way to heaven and can't sit still in their seats, and those who are slumped in their seats, convinced they are on the way to hell. Las Vegas has a malleable identity, seemingly based mostly in the human imagination. There is, of course, a real Las Vegas, which is like the cities from which tourists come, with subdivision shopping centers, museums, and churches. But the symbolic city of Las Vegas presents itself with an otherworldliness. It transforms it into a generative site for exploring hopes and fears. Moreover, as a 20th century aggressively modern city, significantly shaped by developments such as electricity, the automobile, and every type of entertainment technology, Las Vegas is a really interesting place for understanding and thinking about our technological society. Las Vegas is also a city that transgresses not only regular laws, but also typical experiences of space, time, knowledge, and agency. The architectural study, Learning from Las Vegas, published the same year as Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, emphasized the hyper-artificiality of the city. The flat, arid desert yields to fountains of water and glimmering towers, which are filled with large, labyrinthine spaces that obscure physical limits. These artificial enclosures banish the night and ignore diurnal rhythms. And these spaces arrest attention. Visitors must interpret a variety of changing, juxtaposed orders, and chaos seems very near. All of this designed for recreation, which becomes a kind of recreation as casinos engulf visitors in a new role. And agency is abducted for the benefit of the house. Such dislocating experiences can be described as apocalyptic. Now, in the popular imagination, apocalyptic is associated with cataclysm and chaos. In ancient literature, however, the apocalyptic imagination collapsed dualisms between heaven and earthly knowledge, as well as space, time, and agency, to uncover deeper truths and realities. And so viewed apocalyptically, Las Vegas reveals much about our technological society. So first, a lull on the city. In the late 1940s, Jacques Ellul began working on two books. The first was a sociological analysis of the modern technological civilization. It was published in French in 1954 as Technique, or the Wager of the Century, and in English in 1964 as The Technological Society. Ellul's second book was an exegesis of the city in the Bible, and it was published first in English as The Meaning of the City in 1970. Ellul explained that the two books were composed in counterpoint. So my book on technology corresponds to my theologically based study of the great city as the supreme achievement of human technology. In the Technological Society, Ellul focuses on what he calls technique. This is the totality of methods rationally arrived at and having absolute efficiency in every field of human activity. He describes how humanity made a wager on technology in the 20th century and concludes that technology had won the bet and proceeded to beat the house. Ellul argues that the modern technological society has evolved into an autonomous force that pursues its own course more and more independently. He explains that man participates less and less actively in technical creation, which by the automatic combination of prior elements becomes a kind of fate. Man is reduced to the level of a catalyst. Better still, he resembles a slug or a token inserted into the slot machine. He starts the operation without participating in it. Ellul claims it is a vanity to pretend that technique can be checked or guided. We have become enclosed within our artificial creation. Rather than getting rid of technology, he says, we must find a way to transcend its monolithic power. And Ellul has three possible disturbing phenomena he comes up with: war, collective revolt, and divine intervention. But in the Technological Society, at the end, he appeals to individual responsibility and resistance. But in The Meaning of the City, Ellul explores divine intervention as the necessary disruption. The meaning of the city is that it is a curse and only God can correct it. Ellul sees Cain's establishment of the first city in Genesis as an act of rebellion against God, a counter creation that breaks with the divine nature of creation. And in creating this city, humans create an autonomous power stronger than themselves. A city becomes this autonomous system with its own objectives, control, certainty, closure, and commodification. This diabolical city, Ellul concludes, cannot be reformed. It must be replaced by God alone at the end of time. So when Ellul looks at the last city in the apocalypse, New Jerusalem, what he sees is he sees a rejection of human artifacts and artificial agency. Human works are radically evil. The judgment of the final human city in the apocalypse, the last human city of Babylon, is a double condemnation of all cities, past and present, which are not in contact with New Jerusalem, the final city. New creation, he says, which is absolutely new, comes only through judgment and destruction. There is no continuity. New Jerusalem is not a work of our hands. Hunter S. Thompson, disillusioned by the events of the late 1960s, signed a contract to write a polemic on the topic of the death of the American dream. In 1971, he accepted an assignment from Sports Illustrated to cover a motorcycle race in Las Vegas, and the city inspired him to write about his search for the American dream. Thompson returned a month later with a second assignment from Rolling Stone to cover a narcotics convention, and the resulting book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, revealed that his true assignment was to tell, in his words, the main story of his generation about another era burned out and long gone from the brutish realities of the foul year of our Lord, 1971. The book is divided into two parts, one for each assignment. There are 2 abused convertibles, 2 trashed hotel rooms, and a series of drug-fueled episodes surrounding the 2 events that Thompson was supposed to be writing about or reporting on. Each part culminates in a lament. And before each, Thompson writes about Circus Circus, which functions as a synecdoche for Las Vegas. With nonstop gambling, wild circus acts, and loud carnival activities, he found the place an affront to reality that when reality itself is too twisted. Thompson twice calls it the main nerve of the new American dream, that vision of the big winners somehow emerging from the last minute pre-dawn chaos of a stale Vegas casino. This myth of winning when the house is against you is kept alive by stories such as the Circus owners. He always wanted to run away and join the circus when he was a kid. Now the bastard has his own circus and a license to steal too. In his first laments in the book, Thompson grieves the loss of hope and promise he had experienced 5 years earlier in San Francisco. That fantastic universal sense that whatever we were doing was right. That sense of inevitable victory over the forces of old and evil. In his second lament, Thompson concludes, we are all wired on a survival trip now. Drugs for engagement, uppers, and ideas about consciousness expansion have been replaced with drugs for escape, downers, and a loss of faith in that light at the end of the tunnel. And in the final chapter, Thompson ends up taking drugs that shrink perception, sedate him, and make him an incarnation of the American nightmare. For Thompson, Las Vegas reflected a new dark age in America where dreams of freedom and possibility have been reduced to desperate, narcissistic, and nihilistic pursuits. He saw human potential deformed in an avaricious, automated, and artificial reality. In Las Vegas, algorithms bloomed in the desert. Thompson encountered hidden computers sorting people and optimizing operations, and robot-like people serving inhuman systems. He saw how a technological society could surpass human values through mercenary systems, merciless laws, and restrictive surveillance. Thompson's Las Vegas was a manifestation of a technological society without a moral foundation. Now, the apocalypse was one of Thompson's favorite pieces of writing, and it was a key source for his apocalyptically wild work, which explains why his total subjective gonzo style has been described as having apocalyptic affinities. It was this imaginative power of the apocalypse, I think, that helped him search for, in the words of one critic, unvarnished truth in a fast-paced, irrational Cold War world, and to interpret Las Vegas as a metaphor for the depraved state of the American dream. And perhaps to discover signs of hope. While Fear and Loathing is a scathing denunciation of American culture, it is at the same time a celebration of that culture. Fear and Loathing had not completely displaced hope and longing in Thompson's judgment of the city. And perhaps this explains why Thompson wrote 2 other endings for the book, acknowledging that the published version was not a proper ending. After his second lament in the book, he writes, the question as always is now ellipses ? So the question of whether or not humans may realize the freedom and potential we imagine as possible is literally left open with a question mark. Also, Thompson's political activism before and after Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas revealed that he desired and worked for a new city or society. His method was to resort to subversive interventions, refusing to function as a slug in the machine, and instead introducing creative chaos in an attempt to stall the system. John of the Apocalypse. Like other ancient apocalypses, the apocalypse of John functions to open up the imagination to perceive heaven meeting earth, the future and the present, and divinely called agents establishing a new and better world. A circular epistle to 7th first century churches in Asia Minor, the apocalypse begins with John commending those who are doing good works, consoling those who suffer for good works, critiquing those whose works are complicit with evil powers, and chastising the complacent. John then shares a series of visions unveiling God's past, present, and coming transformative work in the world. The apocalypse climaxes with the final fall of Babylon and culminates with the full establishment of New Jerusalem. But before the ultimate destinies of Babylon and New Jerusalem are disclosed in the narrative, these two cities are revealed to be mingled with and present in the church's cities. John calls the churches to turn from Babylon, the fall of which has been declared and is inevitable, and to participate in the arriving reality of New Jerusalem. And it is important to note that these two eschatological cities include complex technological practices and artifacts. Babylon, of course, represents the Roman Empire, an administrative network that used cities as technologies for economic exploitation and political oppression. When Babylon fully falls, its end is celebrated, for its violent injustices end with it. The destruction of Babylon is also lamented, of course, by those who benefited from the excesses of empire. But there's also a separate lament over the loss of cultural activities and artifacts that fill daily life. Musicians playing instruments, artisans and artificers of every trade, technical trade, working with tools, millers grinding grain, and people lighting lamps and celebrating marriages. The apocalypse culminates with New Jerusalem coming down from the new heaven to the new earth. This final city is immense, constructed out of earthly materials, and possesses a glory greater than any human city. God and nature fill the city with life and healing, and the rulers of the earth and the people from all nations bring into it the glory and honor of the nations. The text suggests that all the good in human culture displaced in the fall of Babylon, including various technical trades with their technologies, which were essential features of ancient cities, are brought into New Jerusalem. So a different reading from what Elul saw, instead of the previously ambiguous image of the city being annihilated, it is rather amplified. One commentator, Brian Blunt, observes that the city is part of God's good creation, the locus of God's grand recreation. The old remains a constituent part of the new. So there's another urban network permeating Rome's, and John's readers and hearers are part of and participants in this new creation. Some technologies will be condemned for their deformative role in a pattern of Babylonian counter-creation. Others may have a transformative role, participating in new creation aligned with New Jerusalem. Elul provides a helpful diagnosis of the asymmetrical power of autonomous systems, but he could not imagine how such systems could be displaced or disrupted, and he saw little hope for the human city and the technological society. Thompson's critical distance from autonomous systems helps reveal their merciless operations, but his acts of rebellion introduced minor disruptions and did not satisfy his own desire for a better country. While the apocalypse helped both Elul and Thompson critique the technological society, both viewed it as a condemnation of human depravity and creativity. Both missed not only its affirmation of the city, but also how that affirmation transforms every human city into a technology of new creation. In John's apocalypse, a greater agency both disrupts and transforms autonomous systems. Ultimate hopes and longings are realized in and through the technological city. So if our technologies, including our newest complex artifacts, such as autonomous artificial agents, may not be condemned as agents of counter-creation, perhaps they may be glorified as agents of new creation. And we must, of course, remember the ancient story of Babel and the reality that we create technologies without a clear understanding of their deformative or transformative powers. So at the Mob Museum, the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas, for example, visitors can explore the legacies of the machine gun and the atom bomb, among other technologies. On the 50th anniversary of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, one Vegas writer dismissed Thompson as a tourist on a mission. The resident knows Las Vegas as two cities. Another noted, the fiction is that Vegas is a shallow, hollow place, and the Strip is the worst example of depravity and consumerism. In actuality, Vegas is an inspiring city. Love for Las Vegas can only be conjured by the reality of the place itself. As in every human city, both the deformative and transformative dimensions of our technological society are present in Las Vegas. In the apocalypse, these two dimensions are named Babylon and New Jerusalem. Humans participate in both, but one is doomed to fail, along with its evil technologies. The other is destined to triumph with good technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you can hear me. Okay. Let me make just some comments about all these papers first as a kind of respondent, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments from everybody here. First, comment on Alma's paper, which I like very much. I do have one sort of comment about it, is that it seems to me that you're reading God in Exodus in a way that Christianity has read it, and not in the way that Judaism or rabbinics have read it. And I think you need to, you're reading Exodus as the Old Testament rather than as the Hebrew Bible, and relating it to sort of Jewish views of God's behavior. And God's behavior in the book of Exodus and throughout the Hebrew Bible is always confounding, so that you have to, if you, sort of by my reading of this, you have to reconcile God's anger with his compassion. And those two things stand up. They're not reconciled in the Hebrew Bible. Now, I guess they get reconciled in the New Testament, or in sort of the theological reading of the Hebrew Bible, which is a kind of story of God's problematic behavior and the problematic behavior of the Israelites. And so God's behavior in the book of Exodus is not unproblematic, and it remains a problem, quote unquote problem, in sort of Jewish readings of this text. And of course, the book of Exodus is the foundation for rabbinic Judaism and for Christianity. And those two religions, they're not mother and daughter, they're really sister religions. And of course, they develop with the fall of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 of the Common Era. So your reading of the story of Exodus is, I like it a lot, but you need to accommodate sort of a reading of the Hebrew Bible in rabbinical critique, and then it'll be a little more. Otherwise, you're sort of reading the Old Testament as leading directly to the New Testament. And if you think of the Hebrew Bible as the Old Testament, I guess it does. But if you think of the Hebrew Bible as the Hebrew Bible, it leads to a sister religion. The whole idea of mother-daughter religions is sort of not, I don't think it's, well, I wouldn't make that kind of argument. But you're reading, but anyway, I sort of said that. On the sacred tongue of Mary of Egypt, I thought that was a really interesting paper. I'd only have one sort of comment or two comments. I wouldn't talk about language. I would talk about presence or traces in the context of male discourse. And you can talk about, the impositions of male discourse, but I would talk about presence or traces. And that because just to sort of you have to kind of squeak out from under male hegemony. But if you talk about, again, feminine, saintly presence or traces. Then the other thing I would say is what's at stake for Christianity. That is, you in rightly seeing, as Irigaray does, in rightly seeing feminine discourse, but what's at stake in for Christianity, and it may be what's at stake for feminism and for the place of women in the modern world, which is a big issue. That is a big issue because feminism has to deal with, masculine hegemonic imposition on women. And if you want to start at the beginning, which feminist critics do, but you want to just sort of skirt the idea of language and talk about presence and sort of, I think your argument is fascinating. And the part that I liked the best was when Mary baptizes herself. That's really crucial because I don't know whether John well, I think Jesus baptizes John, but Mary baptizes herself. So there are all these gestures of, a restored feminine place. And of course, a man wrote this. So then you have to kind of work through all that. So men are not so hegemonic. It's very good. Okay. And
Lenny, can I just?
yeah, I'll stop. I don't mean it. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a little bit confused about why would you scrap language? I mean, I don't understand why.
Well, because it's her presence that speaks rather than speaks in words. Because you're gonna get male.
But she has that prayer, the invocation, and that seemed very much.
But it's a silent prayer that the men can't hear it.
Right, but I think it was spoken though, or not?
Well, he didn't hear it. It was spoken, but he didn't hear it. Then you have to figure out why he's not hearing it.
Yeah,
You can
they
use
couldn't
that.
hear it or couldn't understand it, maybe.
Well, you can
Right,
use
I think
that.
wasn't that your interpretation, Janessa? That
Yeah,
that
it was that he couldn't understand it. Perhaps maybe he couldn't hear, or maybe he couldn't understand it because it was, this moment of feminine language.
So you want to argue that he wouldn't hear it?
that he couldn't decipher it, or right? It was my.
Yeah, it was like I leave it open. I mean, I know it's a bit of a stretch perhaps, and the idea of feminine language is itself very controversial and sort of not accepted or challenged in several circles. But I thought that this was actually just an interesting moment where we could trace around a space where it could be, if it was to be, that's where it would be. So just
Right.
kind of like
trying to give you more. Yeah. I'm just trying to give you more arguments for the recovery of female spirituality.
Yes,
Well, it's also fascinating to have these this different perspectives, and
No, I'm on your side. But I mean, if you want to deal with, his not hearing it or not wanting to hear it, I don't know, it depends on the argument you want to make. But I thought presence or traces, because her feminine presence, her religious presence occurs within a male text and in a male system. So you kind of get out from under, men don't have to have a trace. They have the whole stage. I mean, I'm giving you ways to build your argument, which I like. And then, of course, what's at stake in doing this? I don't know if anything is at stake for Christianity, but something may be at stake for our society and women's.
Yeah.
So
it
that's
does seem like,
I would say more about what's at stake in your really elegant reading. So I'm just on Milton. Sorry, I'm so over. I really like how you want to avoid spectacle and a theatricality that shuts down engagement. I think that's a really good way of sort of deconstructing the structure of that poem. Because you do think of it as a drama, but you want to have, you know, an engaged reader questioning the nature of heroism, and your discussion of the messenger is perfect, and the chorus that normally would not interrogate the protagonist in a play, they would reflect it. And so I thought that was really good to deconstruct or reconstruct a structure for it, because you always think of it as a Greek tragedy or modeled on a Greek tragedy. So I thought that was really groundbreaking. And Michael, I love Las Vegas. I was surprised that you didn't talk about the restored Jerusalem in Ezekiel, because remember, the New Jerusalem is in the book of Revelation, but the restored Jerusalem is in Ezekiel, and that is a Jewish view from Babylon about the return to Jerusalem. So you have all the elements there for a reconstructed city, granted reconstructed, you know, according to sort of Jewish presence in the Holy Land. But I sort of wanted to hear something about Ezekiel.
I wish I could have had time to get into that. You know,
I know.
obviously what happens in sort of the evolution of Jewish prophecy is the shift toward a more kind of apocalyptic imagination. And so
Right.
things have to get kind of, you know, reconceptualized, outside of kind of normal history and time. So but it's a good point, and it encourages me to kind of go back and
I
take a
would
closer
just
look
add
at
that. I would just add
because
that.
there's continuity as well as change there going on. So that's really helpful.
So and also the book, this is not a biblical thing, but the book that always seems to me to be, to describe Las Vegas is Langland, Piers Plowman, the city of Piers. So that would be a very, very, you want to build your paper. So Langland describe it, if you know Piers Plowman, that seems like modern, that seems like Las Vegas, whether it's, anyway, okay, so I love the papers, and this is just.
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
For Alma, what is at stake with the Hebrew God's character and promise with your reading of Exodus through a Protestant view, rather than only focusing on the Torah?
Is that a statement? Is that a comment about it, or?
I think it was a question.
Oh, okay.
I think it would just be like a response to your feedback, Lenny. Also, I feel that like the reading of just focusing on like a Protestant view of Exodus as the prequel to the New Testament provides a better character, or just like a description of the Hebrew God, because he allows the option of redemption for the Israelites. So there's no like there is the act of like having a consequence for the sin, but there's also the option of redemption at the end. So in that sense, it must be read that way. Like it has to be read that way, and not only focusing on the vindictive Hebrew God of the Torah, and instead you see this God that allows for redemption and having the option of having life again, in a sense, from that previous action.
Right, but you can, well, you acknowledge it's a Protestant reading of not even a Catholic reading of the Hebrew Bible. Remember, the book of Exodus is the foundation for a couple of religions. So just to make it more, if you just a little more comprehensive, that's all. Or just be upfront about your reading. I mean, that's all I'm saying. And Moses' interaction with God is very, he sounds very hubristic, and he takes over he takes over judgment in Exodus 32. That's a big, anyway, just more, you got more religions relying on this text. So you've got to have more, you have to be attentive to how they read these passages. They read it very differently. That's all I'm saying. You don't have to do, I mean, you don't have to do this. Just saying. That was my first response. There's just more, there are more interpretations of this. And, you know, and anyway, sorry.
Well, also, I was thinking of the Greek Orthodox Church and the split as well, because that enters into some of the interpretations as well.
Right.
So you're right. There's so many varieties of all the major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So it's really hard to pick a filter for interpreting a text for feminists, especially.
And feminist readings too.
Yes.
You just want to be upfront about it. I mean, you can read it anyway. You know, this is sort of scholarship. You want to locate your reading out of a religious tradition, and you can just do that up front. I'm just, because you want to get this, hope you'll publish this. So you've got to like answer questions that people who are going to read it are going to bring up.
That's almost, isn't that almost impossible for us to do as postmodernists? It's.
How do you mean impossible?
I mean, as I agree with Janessa, we were in a panel this morning, and when you first start with postmodernism, like say I came to the medieval saints and the whole history of Catholic saints from Irigaray.
Yeah,
So you start there, and she's critiquing Lacan, and she critiques the whole body of Western philosophy and religion. And she writes in a very, a feminine way. Feminine writing is what she calls it. So then it becomes very hard, to deconstruct ourselves as well when we're trying to. But you're right, it's a necessary step. But there's like layers within layers of interpretation.
May I also comment, Mary, like on what you just mentioned on postmodernism? If postmodernism's critique is that there's a lot of meta-narratives of religion, then isn't postmodernism a meta-narrative in itself as well? So it's difficult to deconstruct everything else because you're reading it through a certain lens. So I agree with what you said, Mary.
Well, I mean, that's what, started it. I mean, before I even read postmodern feminism or any feminism, where first thing you start with is Derrida, okay? As a Platonist, that's the first thing I picked up on my own. And then you go down you do a deep dive and you go through the whole history of Western philosophy and religion. And then of course, I became very interested in non-Western religions and philosophies as well. And I guess that's where we are in 2021. And I think technology is, the other panelists who talked about, the technological age and cities we inhabit is just increasing this, the availability of sources and, interpretations upon interpretations. So it's fascinating. There's room for hope and despair. I agree with the panelists there. I think that was Michael Paulus. Yes. But I mean, I agree with, it's just difficult and the Leonard, Koff, thank you. I mean, all these things are fascinating, and to be inclusive, we want to be inclusive and defend what we're saying, but it's hard to pick a filter sometimes because it just keeps coming at us in different directions.
Right.
I believe at this age, 2021, in a virtual screened existence for
Right.
the last couple of years. And I think that's part of it. So,
I would
yeah,
just suggest,
yeah.
you know, you need to sort of be upfront about, you know, what angle you're taking. And with respect to the Bible, I mean, if you know, feminist reading, ways to recover what is a lost feminine, a lost female presence.
Yes.
Lost, they're not so lost now, but
Kind
lost.
of resurrect it. Yes.
Yeah, you want to
Yes.
do that, right? That's why I like presence or traces. With respect to saints' lives, unless you want to read saints' lives written by women, that's an interesting place to go. And if you bring up issues about, let's say, courtly love, there are men who write women or write out women in courtly love, but there are also women courtly love poets, and those are the interesting ones. So you want to find a female saint writer of saints' lives.
I think
Otherwise, you have to talk about
Martin has a
ventriloquism.
question.
Oh, sorry, Martin. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it's not on this thread. I mean, I guess I first wanted to say I appreciated the whole panel, but just want to offer an appreciation and kind of a comment for Ju Young Cho, and really very thoughtful work. I mean, very thoughtful work about being thoughtful. I mean, that why there was this deviation from tragedy, that it couldn't be staged, that it had to be read and reflected upon, and I thought that was a great reading. But it made me think of something that might seem like not an obvious connection, but recently read a book called Staged by Mignon Argemond, and it's about show trials. And she gives a reading of Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem, and which she says that Arendt's criticism of this has often been misunderstood, and it should be understood as a criticism of the genre. That what was wrong with the show trial of putting this Nazi war criminal on trial is it puts him in the role of the tragic hero, and creates this possibility of puts him on stage, stages him as a hero. So there's a kind of to me there's a weird analogy to the Arendtian criticism of the show trial. I'm not saying Samson is Eichmann, but it breaks down at that point. But that was just my association with that.
Oh, yeah, thank you for the association. I've never thought about that in that side, so thank you.
You don't
for
need to.
Yeah, but I also find it really interesting, so thank you for your opinion. Yeah.
And sort of deconstructing this book as a not a spectacle makes it very sort of rabbinic. That is to say, you're engaged with the text and problems of judgment come to the forefront. So that seems interesting to me too. So I like the way you deconstructed or gave it another kind of structure, a structural, within moral engagement, and made it more biblical rather than Greek or sort of rabbinic than Greek. Yeah, something like that. Other comments or questions? Well, great. Can I say it was a great panel? I think it was a really good panel, very engaged, and so super. So, okay, so now We can all have a drink at home or wherever you are. So a glass of wine, whatever.
Sounds good.
Sounds
Yep,
very
thank
good.
you. Thank you everyone for coming. Really
Thank you.
appreciate
Yes, thank you for your
support.
attention.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for
Yes. Quite a
Dr.
day.
Koff for organizing all this.
Okay. Bye, everybody. I'll stop.
All right.
the recording.
Thanks again. Lynn. Bye.
Have a good
Bye.
night. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Long day. Yes, bye.
Yeah, very long day.
Yeah, because we're all gonna drop now. I think I tuned in and out of a lot of the panels and I didn't quite hear every single speaker as much as I wanted to towards the middle of the day. But yeah, it was a lot to handle virtually. And I'm sure if you were in person, it must be 10 times harder because you have to switch rooms and run to one physical space after another. So I think in a way we got to hear and be at more virtual rooms than would be possible in one day.
Right.
Yeah.
Janessa, I liked your paper. Your slides didn't shift.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that was. I was changing them, but apparently they didn't change, and I didn't notice they weren't changing for you guys. So something went awry there. I'm sorry for that, but apparently the reading was animated enough to kind of help.
Oh, we all got it. Yeah, I just love, as I say, I love the self-baptism. That's really, you might want to land on, gestures that seem transgressive, quote unquote.
Yeah, very resistant and sort of, transgressive might be a word to use there, but definitely assertive for sure.
Assertive, and then you want to sort of theorize what Zosima, is it?
Zosima, yeah.
Zosima, yeah. Is this story from Greek Orthodox saints legends?
I believe it is. I believe it is. I'd have to double check, go back to the book, but all right, guys. Well, have a great night. It was great. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, bye, everybody.
For Leonard, I have a question because you were talking
Sure.
about, because I've tried to teach, Judaism, not very well, but my father-in-law, who's long gone, he was a Old Testament biblical scholar and archaeologist. So I do have, some memory from decades ago, but the problem when teaching it is, you're right, you have the Old Testament, which is for Christians, is just a prelude to the New Testament.
Right.
It's just one source of Judaism. We have to do all the rabbinic scholars, the Torahs, and all the teachings that are part of of a whole complex canon in a way that's different from Christianity. From the Catholicism.
Right.
They tried to restrict all the dialogues, and you're right about the dialogues, the question and answer, and it's so different Judaism than it was.
Catholic readings. Catholic readings of the Hebrew Bible are theological readings. They're not good.
They're awful. No, they're not good at all, because
the rabbis would make very good English graduate students.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, there's none of the exchange, the dialogue, the dialectic, inner outer. You get that from Judaism. You're not getting it from how you're brought up or how you're taught. The New Testament and the Old Testament is just like as you said, just
prelude.
No, it can't be a prelude. It's a whole major tradition that was very.
Are you a teacher, professor?
Yes, I teach I'm an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin, Platteville, but I have a law, but I started out on, in the East Coast, and that's where all my family is, in Philadelphia, New York City. And all my training was there. I ended up here for later in life, midlife, and it was from a divorce and, all those things starting over.
Sure.
And so I got back into, just I have to teach everything. So I have to learn. I have to teach myself because there's such a small program. So I just go into these areas and I'm just fascinated at the gaps that you're filling in, actually. You're filling in for us. Like, okay, we're picking this up, but we have to really go back and trace the roots and how this all, started and then intertwines later, and people are commenting on other people's commentaries.
Right. Did you like Michael's paper on Las Vegas?
Well, I only one I know is Fear and Loathing. I don't think we talked too much about that one. What did you think of that one? Are you in Las Vegas? Are you in Las Vegas?
I'm not in Las Vegas.
Okay.
It's a fun. It's a fun
Yeah.
place. It's so irreal.
Yes, I was only there one time for a conference, and it was it was the very first year I started here, and they had a conference, and we went there, and it was the only time I was there. This was 2022.
It's a strange place.
2002. Okay, look how, it's probably totally morphed and changed since then.
It's a very strange place.
Yeah. So,
And people walk down the street with buckets of nickels.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
a trip. It's a
The
trip.
funny thing is, I was with a Jewish colleague, and she wouldn't, and she was very, self-disciplined. She would not drink or gamble. So if we wanted a free meal,
I'm sorry.
I would get two. You see what I mean? Or I would do it for her, and then we could get to listen to all the free musical acts. And she's gone now. She just retired, but the memories are incredible about Las Vegas. But it's only that one time, So, so I wish, we didn't get to talk about that. But what do you think? Is it because I've heard people do this similar thing. Is it a city of destruction, or is it a city of just fantasy, promise, and hope? And then he's connecting it to technology now, and it's true, but it's still, a gambling place, whatever you call it.
Well, there's no time.
Yes.
There are no clocks in the casino.
Oh,
And it stays up it's up all night.
yeah, day and night.
And it's if you read Langland, Piers Plowman,
Langland, okay, I wanted to get that reference. I don't know that.
that will describe Las Vegas to you. William Langland. It's a medieval book. You can get a translation of it.
Oh yeah, can you send? I don't know that one. I did a presentation on Hildegard, the mystic. Hildegard. Yeah, so she did
from the same period, Langland.
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 Okay, Langland. Okay, Langland.
Yeah, Langland.
Oh, yeah.
Here's
So
Plowman.
oh my, that's interesting. So that will help, in other words.
Oh well, I think his description of the city there in that book is Las Vegas. That's the author I would use to describe Las Vegas.
Yeah. What did you think though about the one about what he chose? I don't know. I don't know Ulyss, and I know St. John's Revelation, but not as well as I should.
Yeah. Well, I suggested you read the other restored Jerusalem in the book of Ezekiel.
Ezekiel, yeah. Oh yes, I'm definitely going to look into that.
That is the other restored Jerusalem. And of course, a lot of the words that figure in Christianity are words that come up in rabbinic Judaism. So there is restoration, there's renewal, there's salvation.
Yes, all.
But all of that is connected with a restored Israel.
Yes.
In this world.
Yes, you're right.
So, the same word applies, but it points to something very different.
Well, it is quite different because my brother-in-law of since 1972. That's when I first met my sister's husband. He's Jewish, and my niece and nephew. My sister converted from Catholicism to Judaism, and my niece and nephew, who are adults, are Jewish. And we always have the conversation. What is their conception of an afterlife? I asked my brother.
That's very, very common.
It's very. That's what he said. We work on it a lot. We
don't know. We don't know. You don't know we don't know what the afterlife will be
Yes.
and what it's like.
Uh-huh.
You focus, you don't have to know what it is to help you behave to bring God into the world while you're in the world. So that's the focus of the religion. A lot of times Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, develops notions of the afterlife and where your soul is under sort of religious pressure from Christianity.
Yes.
But Israelite religion doesn't focus on the afterlife.
Yes, it's bringing about the best life possible right
Yeah,
here.
so that
Yeah,
the
we work for it right here.
So the
Yeah.
restoration of Jerusalem in Ezekiel is the restoration, the return to Jerusalem is the result of the redemption from Babylonian exile.
It's just the promise of being human and having
Right.
harmony, peace
In this world.
in this world.
There are a
Yes.
number of books on the afterlife in Judaism, but Maimonides will say,
Maimonides.
you don't know what God is doing on Jupiter. So there's mystery. You don't know what God is doing on Jupiter, but you know what he did on earth.
Yes.
He came to Mount Sinai and spoke. So Maimonides makes God, he's a 12th century
Yeah.
Jewish
Yes, he's the
philosopher.
philosopher. I guess.
Maimonides makes God explicable on earth,
Mhm.
but we don't know what he's doing on Jupiter.
Everywhere.
So he's inexplicable and mysterious,
Yes.
and he can go to any other planet he wants and give laws. We don't know what he's doing.
Yes. We have to be
So
concerned about restoring and renewing and rebirthing.
on this earth. So
Right
that's
here.
the idea. So that's at Mount Sinai. He's explicable.
This is, yeah.
On Jupiter, we don't know what the hell he's doing.
Uh,
We'll never
Well,
know.
yeah, and you're right. It's so different in a way.
Very different.
This idea about heaven and purgatory and hell.
No, that's
the imagery of that. Some of it's not even that clear in the New Testament, in any biblical rendition. Yeah, but that's why we need the rabbinical, and we need people interpreting for their age, for their time, and we have to
Right.
follow the tradition. Because they're using it, you're building on it.
right.
Otherwise, you can't
Well,
get beyond it. Can't get
okay.
beyond it.
A
Yes.
pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, it's been a long day. You're
Oh,
right.
you need a glass of wine. So
Oh God, I need some water. Yes. So where do you teach? Where are you at right now?
at UCLA.
Oh, well, my son's there. What a
Oh,
coincidence.
super.
He's getting married in March, and he went to he's at UCL. He's in a UCLA, but he was given a NIH grant from the government. So
Oh,
he's been
nice.
there since 2012.
What's he studying?
He did his PhD at Caltech. The government paid for that, but he also has to get the medical degree in combination. So
Oh,
now
nice.
he's doing that this year, and I'll be graduating, getting married in March and graduating in
Well,
June
bravo
from
to him.
UCLA. And I haven't gotten to be there, and I just love that area. I love where he is, but he's really far away. And so that's where you are, UCLA. Well, it's a small world, isn't it?
Very
I
small.
will be flying there. And
Good. Okay. Well,
but
it
thank
was
you.
nice chatting with you.
Yes, thanks a lot for the recommendations and for your comments. Let's go have some drinks or wine. Bye-bye.
Exactly. Bye-bye.
See you later. Bye. Bye. Thank you. To leave.